How's it going, ladies and Bruce? I'm Bobby Sixkilla and welcome back to Deluge. It's time to continue where we left off. I know we're not meant to talk to May, but fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway. If you're sure no one will catch us, let's get dangerous. Let's do shit we're not supposed to do. We'll be fine. There's no one around this time of the day. Is this how you get a bad end? I followed her along a short country trail which led us to an opening in the trees. In the centre stood two massive megaliths, partly buried in the ground. The surroundings seemed well maintained. Do you see those giant stones? There are many of them scattered across the island. I like to come here whenever I'm sad. They warm me up inside. She was right. When I placed my hand on one of the rocks, I could feel it emanate a radiating heat, though I figured this was likely due to their exposure to the midday sun. So are you feeling sad right now? She blushed. No. To be honest, I come here every night. It's not far from the farm, you know. She gave me a tour of the archaeological site, leading me around the megaliths at least 3 times. After she'd confirmed that we'd studied the stones from every possible angle, she drew my attention to a small placard. She appeared to have difficulty deciphering the writing. She looked up at me. Hey, what does that say? I bent over to look at the text, which appeared perfectly legible to me. I began to read. Yet they said that she had a learning disability. Swifterbant something. I decided to read on, not questioning her curious display of illiteracy. I missed it too. It says here that these stones were erected by an ancient civilization. They use them as grave mounds, and as a place to venerate chthonic deities. She was staring at me with a captivated expression in her eyes. Please read more. Read more. The Swifterbant people lived here between 7,500 and 5,500 years ago, during the early Neolithic. They were an early agrarian society that held livestock but also resorted to hunting at times. The stones these megaliths were made from aren't native to the region, but were brought here from Scandinavia during the Ice Ages. That means that they were carried here by large sheets of glacial ice. When the Saal Ice Age ended about 130,000 years ago, the rocks and debris that were caught in the ice stayed behind. May was staring off into the distance, making me fear for a second that she would revert to a mysterious episode again, like on the night after I first met her. But she remained fully aware. And then she began to speak. Isn't that a beautiful thought? When the Swifterbant people found these stones, they had been lying here for more than 100,000 years. The centuries since then have passed in less than a heartbeat. She erupted in a smile as bright as the setting sun. It makes me so happy to think that these stones will still be standing here in another 100,000 years. People will move and kingdoms will fall, but these stones will remain. It'll be like nothing has really changed. I couldn't say it was a reassuring thought, though I welcomed it at the time, as I put my own growing problems somewhat into perspective. Yeah, true. These stones would remain here long after I'd recovered from bankruptcy, long after the burden of my part-time job had herniated my spine, long after I'd succumbed to lethargy in this god-forsaken backwater town, where a couple of oversized rocks were considered for some reason a major tourist attraction. Burn. When night fell, I brought May back to her parents' farm. As we walked in silence, I clutched my book bag tightly under my arm. My gaze wandered off into the fields, these endless fields of impervious green that tapered off into nothingness. And I thought to myself how straight they were, endued with a perfect geometric flatness, as though they had been carefully sleeked out by the trowel of an obsessive god. Danger perfect? What does that mean? Is it my choices? Am I getting ratings here? Is it like when you get an A or a B or an S in fucking... I don't know, Bayonetta or something? I awoke to the furious ringing of the doorbell. As I hurried downstairs, haphazardly dressing myself en route, I wondered for a second why my father wasn't home. He was a notoriously light sleeper. Do you mind? When I opened the door, I was greeted by a familiar face. Ina appeared far too excited to take her finger from the bell. Please stop ringing the bell. Yeah, thanks. The article, have you done it? I want it at the publishers by tomorrow. My semi-dormant mind was digging fruitlessly. The weekly progress article? Did you write it like I told you to? At the early hour, I didn't have the presence of mind to throw up a fight. Tomorrow, I promise, tomorrow. It better not be late. But never mind that, I just received notice that our cover article has set the city council alight. It turns out that the farm assault wasn't an isolated incident. Mayor Van Linden has been receiving signals of worker mistreatment throughout the year leading up to the murder, but he failed to act in any meaningful way. Then last year the incident occurred. And now that the police investigation has come up with nothing, council members are beginning to openly question the mayor's efficacy. Do you realise our publication could cost him his career? Most of her words flew straight by me, though I remember her eyes burning bright like meteorites on that pale Wednesday morning. We should really be getting to school. On another note, fuck off. On our way to school, Ina wouldn't stop lecturing me on the various intricacies of the municipal government. The trip had never felt so long. Man, you sound boring. Voices within the mayor's own party are pushing him to step down. They consider this incident a telltale sign of his continuing incompetence. Members of his own party? Wouldn't that be counterintuitive? Well, it's complicated. Abbot Island Reformed, commonly referred to as AIR, is the largest party in the town council. Its electorate consists of farmers and members of the church. But with its size comes inner division. On the 8 seats of the party currently occupies, 4 are held by members that represent the agricultural sector. They generally come from agrarian families and serve as advocates for the local farms. The other 4 seats, however, are held by the Kuiper faction. Those are members of the church, mainly descendants of the original inhabitants of the island. The current leader of the Kuiper faction is John Kuiper, Marika's father. Whatever happened to the separation of church and state? Ina pressed on, ignoring my remark. Even though they're in the same party, there's tension between the Kuiper faction and the agrarians. The Kuiper faction has always tried to implement a strictly isolationist policy for the town, letting in as few outsiders as possible. The agrarians, however, rely on outside labour during harvest season, and are generally more welcoming toward newcomers. The current mayor of Abbotsford is an agrarian, so the Kuiper faction is weaponising this incident in order to strengthen their position within the party. AIR has always exerted undisputed influence over the town's administrative affairs. You can tell their power has never been contested by an actual free press. I believe there's much more to be uncovered on this matter. I'd like you to ask Rika out on a date. Suddenly I was wide awake. I have absolutely no intention of doing that. We'll see. We arrived at school early. I'm going to head up to the office to change into that terrible uniform. I'll see you in class. Suddenly she dove behind me, as though she were hiding from something. She began to speak in a hushed voice. Look who's here of all people. There, go talk to her. And with those words she slid into a nearby entranceway. Abe, what a pleasant surprise. I hope you've been settling in nicely. I see you're part of the Early Bird Club. We practice with the swimming team on Wednesday mornings. There's a big championship coming up soon. She ran her fingers through her long black hair. I'm so glad you're getting involved with the school paper. Personally, I don't really read it, but my father was absolutely lyrical about that cover piece you ran in the last issue. He can't stop gushing about how much student journalism has improved over the last years. I laughed incredulously. All credit goes to Ina. I just see to a timely delivery? Well, he said your paper's an asset to the town. Come on, there's time left before classes start. Let's take a walk over the school grounds. Ugh. So, you know this place used to be an island, right? I nodded. In the early 1800s, it was home to a community of 400 fishing families. Life was tough, but they made an honest living. Periodically, storms would rage through Isle Bay. The islanders protected Abbot against the water by erecting long barriers built out of wooden poles. But during storms, the barriers suffered and the islander would have to rely on donations from the mainland to restore them. In 1858, a highly turbulent year, weather-wise, The Elizabeth flood swept over low countries, leaving a wake of annihilation behind. Part of Abbot's fishing fleet was destroyed, most of the barrier washed away. Not much later, the government announced the full evacuation of the island. The inhabitants were to be rehoused on the mainland. They said it was due to the increasing threat of storms and the infeasible costs of restoring the wooden barrier. However, some suspect that persistent poverty and inbreeding on Abbot played an equally important role in this decision to evacuate. She smiled a mischievous smile. So in the end, the island was left deserted. Not really. A group of 200 islanders stayed behind, all hardline members of a small reformatory congregation. The Church of Abbot had recently been ejected from the mainstream branch of Low Country Protestantism. These were troubled times, theologically speaking, and church schisms were a common occurrence. Anyway, the seceded congregation vowed to remain on the island, and the government did nothing to stop them. For close to a century, they lived isolated lives with very little contact with the outside world. Until reclamation of the marsh polder began. In the 1940s, Abbot suddenly found itself floating on a sea of fertile soil. Farmers from the mainland migrated here to cultivate the fields. But the original inhabitants of Abbotsford, descendants of the islanders who had seceded in 1858, observed the influx of newcomers with sorrow in their eyes. There had always been tension between the two groups. The farmers work hard, but they're blind to our heritage. A grave expression appeared on her face. The islanders are honest people. They never cover up a crime. By the time we'd made it up the stairs, classes had already started. She turned to me. Do you know what's interesting? After the Elizabeth flood, Abbot was never struck by a storm again. So the entire evacuation had been for nothing? You could say so. Some of the more self-righteous members of our congregation speculate that the floods were punishment by a higher power. That there was no more need for them. After all, subversive elements had been extracted from the community. The kingdom of heaven is like a net cast into the sea that gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, the fishermen hauled it ashore. Then they sat down and gathered the good fish into vessels, but cast the bad away. Anyway, I have to go to class now. I absolutely love talking to you. Also, I was wondering. She paused for a second, tenderly winding her hair around her finger. Would you mind going out for dinner this Saturday evening? My parents are attending a wedding and I'd hate to eat alone. Aw, man. I could detect a hint of anxiety in her voice. Will you join me? Man, I don't want to do that. This town has restaurants? I know a good one. It's run by people from our church. I'm not going to get to say no, am I? I was struck by the candour of her sudden proposal. So struck that I had no choice but to accept, even though I realised I was playing directly into Ina's plans. God damn it. Then it's a date. See you next Saturday. Don't say that, idiot. With a nod of her head, she said goodbye. God damn it. Ina pulled me aside the moment classes ended. She seemed nervous. Sorry? I shook my head in ignorance. What'd you manage to get out of Rika? Safe. She complimented you on your journalism. Yeah, she would, wouldn't she? Just tell me what you guys discussed. Though I still have vivid recollections of Rika's coiling hair, I had to admit the details of our conversation this morning had long since faded to the back of my mind. We talked about the town for a bit. And? I thought for a second. She said the Isle of Abbot was evacuated in the 19th century due to inbreeding. Does that make sense to you? Sure, they were ravaged by storms at the time. Only a small community remained, including the Kuiper family. Well, then I don't think she told me anything of interest. I should be the judge of that. An awkward silence lingered. The newsroom was a mess. Every inch of floor space was filled up with boxes, newspaper clippings, scattered clothing. So, Ina, I was wondering... What? When will you introduce me to the other editors on the staff? She flinched. It's not a school paper. I never said it was. We have got other editors, but they mostly work from home. So like I write everything myself. It appeared that I'd hit a nerve, and I began to regret my line of questioning. I dug through my memory for something that would cheer her up. You know what? There was something strange that Rika told me this morning. What? Something about a church schism, just before the island was evacuated. She was a little vague on the matter. As expected, Ina appeared unnaturally interested. A schism, you say? In the Church of Abbot? Rika said it was the reason some of the islanders stayed behind. Ina had begun browsing her phone while a soft murmur trickled from her lips. A church schism? That seems highly unlikely. If only... There, I found something. It's called Theological Inquiries into the Congregation of the Church of Abbot. Is it relevant? Some more typing. I'm not sure, it could be. Inquiries were a big deal in the Reformed Church at the time. They could point towards corruption or severe theological divergences. The thing is, the Church of Abbot and the Kuiper family have always held a pivotal position of power in this town. Her eyes were glowing. Any dirt on them, old or new, would surely cause a stir, much more than any aberrant migration pattern of insects ever will. She turned her attention back to her phone. There it is. They must have a copy of the Municipal Archive of Bremersburg. That's less than 20 minutes away by train. We'll go there on Friday. On Friday? Don't we have school on Friday? Oh, but this is much more important than school. And besides, we get a lot of time for mandatory club activities. As we headed downstairs, I noticed she was trembling with excitement. Little creepy, but okay. Let's head over to my house for now. I want to run some ideas by you. I wasn't in the mood to protest. Her house had a well-kept, almost sterile appearance to it. As she led me into the living room, I noted a hint of sadness in her eyes. After prying, she told me that her mother was touring at the moment. She was a famous conductor, Mina Mingelberg, currently serving as the musical director of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. I mentioned I'd seen her name on a playbill once, when I still lived in the city. So this is my room. I hate it though. Empty houses give me the creeps. That's why I'm usually at the office. She produced a large book from her bag, the same one I'd seen her reading at school. I'm reading Oswald Spengler at the moment. Untergang das something or other. I missed it. I haven't made it past the second chapter. She folded it open to a page that she'd marked with a slip of paper. A boundless mass of a human being flowing in a stream without banks. Upstream, a dark past wherein our time sense loses all powers of definition, and restless or uneasy fancy conjures up geological periods to hide away an internally unsolved, oh my god, downstream a future even so dark and timeless such as the groundwork of the Faustian picture of human history. She closed the book and handed it to me. Modern man's yearning for infinite progress is Faustian in nature. Spurned by his endless aspirations, humanity involuntarily seals its own fate. We have left the natural state far behind. We couldn't return even if we wanted to. Being has been altered irredeemably. I'm sorry for dragging you down here. I know you're not really interested in this newspaper business. It's just... I talk in myself. I don't have someone else to talk to. Whenever I'm catching on to something great, it drives me insane. I gave her a reassuring nudge. I guess you know my predicament. She smiled. You know, I have a feeling this church piece is going to be big. Bigger than anything we've done before. Bigger than the Sanford House affair. What's the Sanford House affair you keep talking about? It was out before I realized what I was doing. Didn't I tell you? Our expose on the Sanford House affair was our finest hour, the scoop that truly put the Sunday Abbot on the map. It was around this time last year when the Evening Mirror, a smutty tabloid, published a series of compromising photographs of an influential Abbotsford politician. The photos were taken inside a notorious Bremersburg cabaret club, where he was being courted by a dancing girl. The politician in question is named Leopold Marquis of Abbot, to be precise, a member of the nobility. He still holds a seat in the Abbotsford City Council. Leopold hails from an old lineage of lords on the Isle, He has quite the reputation as a party animal, and for that reason the incident initially blew over without much ado. But 4 months later we received an anonymous package at the office. It was another set of photographs, placing Marquis Leopold at a lavish party inside Sandford House, one of the oldest mansions in Abbotsford. There were more girls present during this occasion, and the Marquis apparently appeared to be fully inebriated. In a note, the anonymous source explained that Marquis Leopold has been carrying classified documents with him on the night that he attended Sandford House. But after the hedonistic party, the source wrote, his briefcase and the documents it contained were nowhere to be found. We ran an absolute bombshell of an article. Apparently the Marquis had indeed lost classified policy papers on that fateful night, and to make matters worse, he hadn't notified the council of their disappearance. It became a lot harder to forgive the Marquis' decadent escapades when the political integrity of the community was at jeopardy. The Kuiper faction initiated a charge declaring that the Marquis' conduct was unworthy of a Christian political party. They had a field day with the whole affair. So did Leopold lose his seat over this? He didn't. He's an elected official after all, and is therefore protected by the Constitution. However, his position within AIR has become precarious since that affair. I doubt he'll return after the elections. She stopped abruptly, looking down, then up at me again. I'm probably boring you. It's okay, you should be on your way home. I'm going to read some more Spengler before bed. You do that. I spent most of Thursday afternoon loitering around town, trying to find something or someone to write my weekly progress article on. Sadly, as I searched in vain, it began to dawn on me why Ina had uploaded this piece on me. Unloaded it. Abbotsford didn't really have any progress to report. Then a flash in the corner of my eye. No, move away, hellhound. I'm not even working today. Ferris, leave the man alone. As soon as Miss Voorhees entered the scene, the dog became as docile as a lamb. Hi, Karen. Thanks for coming to my rescue again. I feel like he's warming up to you. He didn't even bite you this time. So what brings you here today? Ina's making me write an article. It can be about any person or event in town. The thing is, it's due today. You wouldn't be referring to the weekly progress, would you? That's a local favourite. Ina must have a lot of faith in you to entrust you with such an important piece of journalism. I could tell she was concealing an impish smile. Anyway, if you want, you can interview me. It may help with my re-election if I get some positive press out. Maybe you could write the whole thing for me. She burst out laughing. Come on, let's go someplace where we can talk. She let out a long sigh. Small town politics can be a headache. That piece you guys published last week, to be fair, it caused quite a bit of commotion. She adopted a more serious demeanour. Let me state first and foremost that our party has always been a proponent of the free exchange of labour. Abbotsford has some of the largest farms in the region, so come August there's always a huge demand for seasonal workers. What party are you in? Abbot Island Reformed, but currently in charge. Labourers come here from all over the Low Countries, many even from further afield. The work offers them an escape from poverty. It's in our greatest interest that they're treated well. The thing is, not everybody is welcoming towards outsiders. Over the last years, a new political movement has been growing in our membership. Flock 05 they're called. They were founded in 2005. Flock 05 takes a more cautious stance on labour migration. They claim that our seasonal workers constitute an unnecessary burden on the local infrastructure. There was a small incident not long after the party was founded in which a group of farm workers had been caught stealing food from local stores. It was just petty theft, but Flock really went to town with it, converting the incident into a large electoral windfall. Do you think people from Flock 05 are behind the murder? No, and I don't want you writing that. It's just that this subject matter is more complicated than it seems. AIR has always protected the rights of all farm workers, but the general attitude has been shifting lately. What about the Kuiper faction? The Kuiper what? The Kuiper faction within your party, do they share your stance on the labour migration? I'm afraid you're misinformed. AIR is one party, we don't have factions. She began speaking in a hushed voice. Look, I understand you guys feel involved. I'll tell you more, but you'll have to consider it off the record. I smiled. No problem. I have more than enough material as is. This is a very painful incident for our mayor. The farm murder occurred on property that belonged to his brother. I nodded. Now, several voices are implying that the police investigation into the abuse was intentionally halted by Mayor Van Linden and the Chief of Police. But I know the mayor, he wouldn't do such a thing. After the assault, the victims' co-workers returned to their hometowns. They weren't available for further questioning. The police closed the case because they really didn't have any more leads. And the mayor's brother? What kind of person is he? I'm not sure. She paused. He works his people hard, a little too hard at times, but he's not a sadist. He wouldn't do that to anyone. Anyway, I really need to get back to work. If you guys want, you're welcome to come over to my place for coffee sometime. I can imagine Ina would love to have a source inside the council. On Friday, we snuck out of school during lunch break. Outside of the commuting hours, the train to Bremsburg only ran sporadically. We had to rush to make it in time. This game has so much original art. This must have taken, or cost so much, or taken so much work. I loved your article. She appeared reluctant to admit it, like a child enjoying broccoli. It had its flaws, of course. It's just, I never thought about using the weekly progress section that way, for actual journalism. It just happened to bump into Karen in the street. We shot past miles and miles of farmland. Ina had begun murmuring in herself. I haven't seen any bees this year. There were a few last year, but none this summer. It's just crickets now. You know they kept me up last night. The crickets in their maddening song, like 1,000 voices crying out in terror. As if they can sense their impending death once winter comes. If winter ever comes. I shrugged. I spoke to the archivist on the phone. He confirmed that the publication should be there. It's part of a larger collection of church inquiries that were commissioned by the Presbyterian of Low Countries after the secession of 1834. The Reformed Church has always been prone to schisms. In 1834, however, 3 congregations seceded at once out of dissatisfaction with liberal tendencies within Reformed theology at the time. During the subsequent decades, many more churches followed in their wake, to the point where the remaining pastors felt the time had come to take action. The Reformed Church isn't a centrally coordinated institution. Due to the particular state of affairs, however, the remaining pastors agreed to converge in what was named the Presbytery of the Low Countries. Presbytery resolved to rout out churches that appeared to stray from mainstream Protestant theology. By proactively extending troublesome congregations, the church hoped to end the broader trend of insurgency once and for all. The document we'll be consulting is a church inquiry commissioned by this very presbytery. It pertains to a congregation on Abbot Island led by the Reverend John Kuyper. It would eventually lead to their expulsion from the Reformed Church. This all took place in 1857, not long before the evacuation of the island. Is Johann Kuyper... Yes, her great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, I'm keeping up. I'm trying to keep up. We made our way toward the archives. The church was noisy as usual. So, this is Bremsburg. I assume it's the first time you've been here. It was built shortly after the war, carefully planned to function as the metropolitan hub of the newly reclaimed land. How can something that's been thought out so meticulously grow into such an abomination? In the past, cities arose out of the countryside, nourished lovingly by their surrounding communities. But now the giant city sucks the country dry, insatiably and incessantly demanding and devouring fresh streams of men, till it wearies and dies in the midst of an almost uninhabited wasteland. Bremsburg has become a dismal necropolis, wrapped in the sounds of countless invisible cars all attempting to find their way in this inorganic street plan. It appears completely amorphous to me, like a welded together amalgamation of leftover parts of other cities, lacking in any differentiating feature. the municipal archives were curated by the University of Bremersburg. We made our way through a few galleries of natural history exhibits until we reached the library. Without as much as looking around, Ina went up to the archivist and asked him for the document she was looking for. He eyed her with a bemused glance in his eyes. So you're the students that made a reservation for the theological inquiries? Sure. Is there a problem? He chuckled. Oh, not at all. It's just that we don't get many requests for these dusty church annals. He left briefly to dig up an old book. Here it is. It isn't available for loan, so you have to consult it at one of our reading tables. We sat down. From the moment Ina opened the heavy, leather-clad book, a musty fragrance poured forth from its yellow pages. In a hushed voice, she began to read. Journal of the Reverend Thomas W. H. Backer, Inquirer of the Presbytery of Low Countries. Saturday, 19th of September 1856. We set sail early in the morning to favourable winds and quiet waters. Aboard were Captain John H. M. Bourne and his 2 crew members, a travelling merchant, some islanders, and a gentleman, Marcus P. Brasschart, who were serving an island as a replacement schoolteacher. You're excused to read silently if you'd like. Let me skip ahead a bit. With the good south wind behind us, it took less than half an hour to catch the first sight of the island in the distance. But as we approached Abbot, we struck harsh and impetuous waves, and whitecaps formed around us. Within a matter of minutes, the formerly peaceful sea had erupted into a fierce tempest, rocking our ship to and fro. Though we as passengers were distraught by the sudden onset of the storm, the captain reassured us that sudden gales were not uncommon on the Strait of Isle Bay. But as I lay cooped up in the ship's stern, I prayed fervorously for our safe voyage. There appeared to be no end to the tempest. As I had a clear view of the firmament from my hiding place, I began to notice that the storm was imbued with a strange quality of sorts. For although the sea was unruly turmoil, erupting in waves and eddies of violent fervour, the sky above remained blue and completely devoid of wind. It was as though not a gale but a submarine vortex was kicking up these crashing waves. And when I gathered the courage to look overboard, I fancied at times that I could see a thin black ripple coiling through the waves, glistening whenever it broke the surface in the ever-dazzling sun. Leviathan! It took us the greater part of an hour to reach the harbour, and when the ship finally moored, the tempest abruptly came to a halt. In a matter of minutes, the waves disappeared and the sea returned to its original calm, as though no storm had ever laid hands upon it. Scores of islanders had spilled from their houses to congregate around the pier. Immediately I could discern the tall figure of Reverend Kuiper with his chalky white hair that appeared to glow against the back of his cassock, standing with outstretched arms as if to consecrate the weather-beaten ship. She read silently for a while. Thomas stayed at the manse where the Kuiper family provided him with food and dry clothing after his dire journey. He describes Reverend Kuiper as a dignified gentleman. And he makes special note of Johann's daughter, Hendrika, a charming though secretive young woman with flowing black hair. Then it skips over to Sunday morning, where Thomas will attend his first service on the island. I attended Sunday service next morning. Observance proceeded in great solemnity in commemoration of the 2 fishermen who were lost to the sea last week. The sermon contained many nautical themes, alluding to both the calling of the fishers and the beast Leviathan. However, I believe this to be nothing out of the ordinary for seafaring communities. On Monday morning, the 2 men conversed together, delving deep into Kuiper's religious teachings. Let me skim through this part quickly. After what felt like a century, Ina looked up at me and began reciting. What I have come to learn is worrisome. I can only conclude that Kuiper's theology, in its essence, lacks in, whatever that word is, underpinnings of our shared faith, substantiating these core tenets with a view on historical redemption that is cyclical in nature. For Kuiper, the New Testament culminates seamlessly into the book of Job, leading to all of biblical history, including the synoptic Gospels and the New Covenant, to recur again and again. Based on our conversation, I'm inclined to agree with the whatever that word is, that the creed that is proclamated on this island is fundamentally alien to the doctrinal axioms as is set forth in the canons of the... Oh God! Am I even inclined to doubt Kuiper's worldview is fully something? Stop throwing words like that at me. After luncheon, I recused myself for an afternoon walk in order to mediate on our conversation. As I made my way across the perimeter of the isle, looking out onto a glittering endless sea, I couldn't help but notice that I was being trailed by a dark figure. I turned around just in time to catch a glimpse of Hendrika, leaping behind one of the gargantuan stones that lie scattered across the isle. I called out, asking if she would care to join me, but she let out a shrill laugh and ran away, with her black hair trailing behind her. Ina pulled a concerned face. That's strange. There isn't much more to the report. He skips over a few days and then recounts the last meeting the two men had on Friday evening. I am now confident to write that the Reverend Kuiper and I have reached a mutual agreement, a degree of understanding. Kuiper has further clarified his theological positions to me, and I am fully confident now that his doctrines are wholly in accordance with the three forms of unity, in no way contradicting our shared Reformed confession. I believe Kuiper is a fine man who operates as a good shepherd for his congregation. Our prior misunderstandings appear to have derived from my own ignorance of local cultures and customs, not from any fundamental unorthodoxy within the religious teachings of the Church of Abbot itself. Cool. In conclusion, I therefore recommend that no punitive or expulsory action is taken against the Reverend Kuiper or his congregation. She put the book down. That's strange. Did you notice anything? And with that, we're going to wrap this episode up here. Sorry, I fucking lost my train there, right at the end there, throwing those theological words at me like that. I couldn't fucking cope. Anyway, I'm curious to see what happens next. Anyway, I'm curious to know how much the choices that I've made up to this point have changed the way it's played out, because a lot of these feel like it probably doesn't change anything, but we shall see. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.